Now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Folks, isn't it time? Isn't it time for us to take back control of our government? Now, before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, folks, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. I'm going to repeat that, folks. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. We must shed all those beliefs that have been jammed down our throat when we were young by our government school system. Revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Welcome, folks, to the University of Logic, better known as Cristiano's Conservatory, correcting convoluted conversation. I think I am going to... Is it possible for a body to explode?
Maybe.
Is it possible? I feel as if my body will explode. I want to explode. I'm afraid there's going to be bits and pieces of me all over the studio. You'll never find all of it. I will be a permanent part of this building until they take it down. They implode it. You know, when you listen to these people, our elected officials, and I say that, believe me, with absolute disdain, when we listen to those elected officials, if we ever thought for 2 seconds what they were actually saying, we would know that we are clinically insane for even listening to them. I would like to go over just a few comments before we get into our program, and this may take our whole program, and it's well worth it, because if I don't get it off my chest, I'm going to explode, and if I explode, it's going to be a messy place. And by the way, we have a whole bunch of people here in our studio. We have many guests. In fact, we have one person here from... No, he says, oh, no. He stays anonymous, but he's not from this country. He's from a foreign country, and he's visiting. It's foreign country. That doesn't nail it down too closely, does it for you? Okay, we're okay with foreign country. Folks, Obama said if you don't like what is going on with a particular policy or position, he says, get out and win an election. Get out and win an election. Think about that just for a few seconds. Well, does he mean that he wants me to run for office? Does he mean he wants me to go out and vote for the lesser of two evils? Does he want me? What does he want? What does he mean by that? Let's take option number one. I ran for office twice in 2000 and 2004. I was on a legitimate party ticket. I ran for the 1st Congressional District here in Tulsa, and it was hell. I was invited to... Would you believe it? You will not believe this, but there was a major debate, and of which those people who were running for office were invited. Well, they invited the Democrat and the Republican. I was not invited. I went ballistic. I was running on the Libertarian Party ticket when it was allowed here in Oklahoma, which is not allowed any longer, and yet I wasn't invited. Now, that's bad enough. Now, this really should get your dander up. The people who were sponsoring this debate was the League of Women Voters. Just think about that. An organization that had fought for decades to get the rights of women, the voting rights for women, who fought tooth and nail to bring everything to the fore instead of just having a group of men running everything, refused to have me debate. Now, remember, our president said if you don't like a particular position, win an election. Well, how do you win an election when you are not asked to participate? Now, look back at the election, the last election. Do you recall the debates that they had both on the Republican and the Democrat side? And by the way, they are equal in this, but one is more dramatic than the other. Do you remember when Obama was debating Hillary Clinton and there were several other people on the stage? I don't recall who they were, but I do recall one thing of what, were there 11 debates? Anyone help me out with that? 11 debates? Something like 11 debates. 11 debates. Every one of them, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama had center stage. Now, statistically, I went to a friend of mine who's a mathematician. I said, what's the probability of those two people having the same, just by chance, having the same position on that stage? He said, it's impossible. He says, it's so big. He said, you don't want to calculate it. In other words, the staging was staged. Now, you recall on the Republican side, they had people like Ron Paul at the very end. And I remember one debate, it was 30 or 35 minutes before they asked him the first question. And when they did, they vilified him before even asking him the question. They were disrespectful and asked him sort of a question like, they didn't ask this question, but it was of this tone, do you enjoy beating your wife? Where the others were asked, puffy questions like, do you think that the economy can come back and America can be great again? All that crappy garbage, the fluff. Now, remember, Obama said, you don't like a particular position? Go out and win an election. Well, how can you do that? I recall back, I think it was up in the Northeast, where Ron Paul was getting tremendous press. I mean, whenever he had a rally, thousands upon thousands would show up. The arenas could not hold the number of people that wanted to hear Ron Paul. And at the same time, when Romney was holding his speech, in fact, 700 people showed up. Ron Paul, mega thousand showed up. A couple of days later, during the election, Romney got 35% of the vote, and Ron Paul had 3 or 4. No, it can't happen. It cannot. You can't have 7,000 people show up in an arena that say, oh, I showed up in the arena. I don't think I'll vote now. Folks, you cannot run for office. It's rigged. It's rigged against you in more ways than, believe me, I've done this twice. Never again. I say never again, not because I don't want to run for office, not because I do not want to be in office and straighten this government out. It's because it is impossible to get into office. And even if I wanted to run for Senate or Congress, I still would need money from, guess who? Big agro, right? The military industrial complex, all the big medical, right? All the boys. Yeah, APAC. All of the big boys who give hundreds of thousands of dollars, through the back door, through all this, they give to each one of these guys. And sometimes they give equal amounts because they don't know, they're not sure who's going to win. And if I ran, what would I get? Zippo. In other words, I would have to be a multi-millionaire and use a good portion of my wealth just to run, Joe, and the probability of me winning is very small.
Joe, are you saying this is rigged?
Oh, no, not rigged. So when he says, you don't like a particular policy or position, go out and win an election. Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much. And now the second thing he says, push to change it. Push to change it. How? He's all full of these platitudes. I don't understand one of them. How? Push to change them. Push what? He doesn't explain it. Push to change it. You don't like it? Push to change it. All right, next problem. Then he goes on to say, don't break what our predecessors spent 2 centuries building. No. No, you've got it wrong. Since Harding and Coolidge were the last real presidents we had. Since Calvin Coolidge, they've spent all their time breaking what our predecessors built. We don't have to do that. That's already been done. So don't give me paint this picture that this is a free enterprise system, and by complaining about it, we are the bad guys. In fact, if you read our Declaration of Independence, what does it say? It says if you don't like, if once the government becomes abusive and no longer is governing according to the will of the people, it is time for change. It is time for us to become dissidents, not to run for office. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution say nothing about running for office. And then the fourth one, he says, and not being faithful to what this country is all about. He doesn't know. He knows what this country is all about. He just doesn't follow it. This country is about individual freedom, freedom from government, freedom from regulation. It's because we have three branches of government which are supposed to act as checks against one another. When government doesn't work, that's what it was intended to do, not to work.
Yeah, but they opened up the government, Joe. We're not shut down anymore. They're heroes.
Open for business.
We're open for business now.
I'm sorry, you clowns. I forgot all about that.
They're doing their job.
I forgot all about that. Now, folks, when we hear these guys, we have to dissect it. Now, let me not pick on Obama. How about Reid? Reid is even better. Not better. I'm not sure which one is better. They're both bad. Here, Reid said, after the vote, he says, it's not a time, and it says this thing like it's a funeral. This is after the vote. They got their way. It's not a time for pointing fingers or blame. This is a time for reconciliation. Reconciliation? If you do something wrong, we're going to reconcile it? How do you do that? It's always the how that they never answer. Here, he goes on, he says, well, we look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in this great capital. Oh, you do? When was the last time you did that? And by the way, we don't want you to work with the colleagues on the other side of the aisle in that great capital, because when you do, you promulgate more legislation and I lose more freedom. Don't do that, please. I'm yelling at him when he's saying this. I say, no, rescind that statement. Then he goes on to say, to pass this remarkable agreement. Remarkable agreement? Who endowed you to bless? We got to take a break. Don't go away. Let's go. Welcome back to my rant, folks. I'm sorry I'm subjecting yourself to this, but if I don't do this, I won't sleep. I'll blow up, and of course you'll miss the hell out of me. So I might as well finish this off. Just be tolerant and be with me. And I do want you to call 855-866-1170. Of course, our email is comments@libertytalkradio.com. And we're here at 1170 KFAQ. We're glad that you've joined us. It goes on, Reid goes on to say, allow us, he says to pass this remarkable agreement and then to allow us to set a foundation for economic expansion. Now, that one gave me a headache. You mean Obamacare is set in order to establish a foundation for economic expansion? I would love to know how he made those two connect. In fact, if anything, this would retard economic expansion. Everyone on planet Earth is saying that. The Russians are saying that. The Chinese are saying that. Brazilians are saying that. How dare he say that? And then he says, we sent a message to every American to each one of our 50 states. You certainly did, and you pissed about 90% of them off, Hold on a second.
You got a caller that wants to praise you.
Okay, we're going to take just hold on. I'm almost finished.
All right.
And then he says, to return to our most important job of fostering economic growth and protecting middle-class families. I appreciate Obama's steady hand with helping us arrive to this conclusion. And with that, I got a violent headache. Let's take a call. What is he on line 2?
He's on the air.
He's online. Oh, you're on the air.
Hey.
Caller, you're on the air. Your first name, where you're calling from, please.
I'm calling from here in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, I'll tell you what's on my mind. You're on my mind. I'll tell you what, you've been very, I love exactly what you're saying and expressing, your opinion, and you actually mean a lot to, I'm sure, a lot of your listeners out there who believe in your beliefs, but the main question is, how do we change it?
Well, that's the problem, because according to Reid or Obama, all we got to do is run for office or support the person that's running for office, whomever that may be, become active politically. But my problem with all that is that if this was truly a free country, the most precious asset that every individual has, you as well as me, and we're equal in this regard, equal with everyone else, all 6 billion plus people in this world. The only one asset that we have is our time on earth, and it's all limited. So he wants me to take my time, my most precious asset, or your most precious asset, and spend it frustratingly running for office or trying to change the damage, basically, that is being inflicted upon us by those people that we elected into office, that we pay, who are inflicting damage on us and asking us to pay for it. Now, that's what drives me absolutely crazy. So your most precious asset means nothing to these people.
Well, I'll definitely agree with that. But
now,
one thing that kind of throws me off the most is that how in the world did Obama ever get into office anyway? He only spent one term as, I don't know if a senator or something like that, but he was only a paper shoveler.
I know a person who is a multi-millionaire who went to school with Obama, or apparently. He said, he said he was apparently in my class. I don't remember him. And by the way, I won't mention his name, but he is a very prominent figure. He's been on CNN, CNBC, all the big channels at number of times. And he and I talked about this. He said, he said what he did is he actually went back to school. He went back to the school, got the names of all the people in the classes that Obama, and he asked them, he said, do you remember this guy? No one remembers him. Now, I don't think this guy's lying. There's no reason to lie. How did he get into office? I don't know. But I'll tell you this. Some statistics. 52% of Americans now are on some sort of government subsidy, whether it be food stamps or whatever. 52%. So when you have someone saying, don't worry, we're going to make life even easier for you, you're in the minority. I am in the minority. We can't win that game. The numbers are against us because these people will fight tooth and nail to preserve all of the cookies that are being given to them for free. We can't fight that. Now, what's the answer to that? Protect yourself. Do for yourself what farmers did back in the 1900s, early 1900s. They made do for themselves. They became independent. I had a guest here on at the studio, in fact, about 3 months ago. It was called micro-secession. He says, forget about the state seceding. He said, you secede. And he just talked about the simple things. In fact, you should get the book. It's called Micro-Secession. And, I can't remember the guy's name. Can someone help me? I can't remember his name, and that's terrible.
I forgot his name.
Yeah. And he talks about simple things that we can do to divorce ourselves from the system totally legally. And that's the only thing we can do, caller. And by the way, for calling in, please send me an email to comments at libertytalkradio.com with a mailing address and T-shirt size. I'd love to send you a Liberty Talk Radio T-shirt.
Well, I thank you very kindly, and I enjoyed getting to speak with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay. Well, folks, there was, every once in a while, you hear a comment that is so incredibly profound. It's so simple, but incredibly profound, it shakes you. This week, I was listening to an interview with Rob Arnott. He is the let's see if I have all his credentials here. I don't want to give the wrong credentials. Robert Arnott. Where he is? Where is he? Here he is. Okay. He's the founder and chairman of Research Associates. He manages $150 billion in assets. That's slightly more than what I have, by the way.
Wow.
$150 billion in assets. All right. Now, he was being interviewed and on King World News. And what he said was this. He said, the politicians are incentivized in order never to solve a problem. Because if they recognize a problem, that means they're recognizing in advance it's not already people have not been hit by it or whatever, or affected by it. And he said, so if the people don't know about it, don't know about the problem, and you see it coming, it's going to affect adversely the people you represent, and you fix the problem, it usually comes in some sort of form of austerity or slow down, stopping something that you're doing now, cutting back on something. And so when it comes time for election, they'll say, well, do you remember so-and-so? He stopped funding for A, B, C, D, and they vilify him for it. And the people say, yeah, and they make him look like the bad guy. So what politicians have to do to stay in office, they have to wait for the problem to get so bad that it affects the people adversely, so they can come in with the like the knight in shining armor, and sort of try to fix the problem, which just means printing more money or whatever, or shuffling things around. So when they run for office, they can say, I've solved the problem of this, this, and that. So they have no incentive to ever fix a problem, but just try to massage it after it hits, and it never gets solved. And it's a profound statement. Absolutely profound statement. So when you think about it, and you think about the ties that people have to government today, it is virtually impossible to get government to do the right thing. And the few times that I've known it to be done, when in fact they changed a piece of legislation in favor of the people, there were tag-ons and tack-ons to these things where, earmarks, so to speak, where it actually compounded things. Oh, yeah, here it is. By the way, here's the name. Microsecession is by Jonathan Bartlett. Sure, I know him. My brain got stuck. Okay. Microsecession by Jonathan Bartlett. You see my point, folks. And what I object to the most is when these people in office talk about compromise. Whenever you compromise, what are you compromising? Every time you have a position, it's a moral position. If you're defending the Constitution, it's a moral position. If I compromise my morals. I'm not compromising money. I'm compromising my morals. So, in effect, if Congress compromises, they are all immoral.
Wow.
What you're looking for is consensus. Saying, well, this does not apply here because of whatever reason. The reason why we're advocating it is because of this. This principle does not apply. And you can say, you're right. So you're not compromising your principles, but someone's bringing information to light for you to reevaluate it. That is never, ever done in Congress. Never. Has never been done in Congress. They always compromise, mean they compromise their principles, means they're unprincipled. So when they say we have to compromise to get this done, that is the worst course of action they can take. I hope you understand that. And I hope next time you hear that, you remember the comments by Robert Arnott. You remember my definition of compromise versus consensus. And the fact that the only person that can dig you out of where we are right now is you. Now, I'd like you to stay with us. Our second half, we have Paul Jenkins coming in of Citizens in Charge and writer of Common Sense. It's going to be a great interview. Don't go away. Let's take a break. Thank you for joining us again here on 1170 KFAQ, Liberty Talk Radio, better known as the University of Logic. Again, better known as Christie House Conservatory, correcting convoluted conversation. Let me tell you, our politicians sure give us enough of that. On our second half of our program, we have a guest. Paul Jacobs is calling in. He's a leading national figure in the initiative and referendum drive. He's the president of Citizens in Charge. Paul has worked on over 100 initiatives and ballot access campaigns in nearly every state. An acclaimed multimedia commentator, Paul hosts an online radio and print opinion program, Common Sense. I read it every day, folks, which reaches a growing list of over 15,000 email subscribers and is aired daily by more than 150 stations in 48 states. Is a good friend of mine. Here he is. Paul Jacobs. Paul, are you there?
I sure am, Joe. Great to talk to you.
Great to have you on the program. Paul, tell me, have I gone astray?
No, I don't think so. I got to listen to your earlier comments, and of course, it's not impossible to, for any individual to get elected to an office, but it's extremely difficult.
Right.
For the people to control the folks in public office, and we see that again and again and again. And it's not one party or the other. Right. It's systemic across the government. I mean, I always think of Obamacare, which whatever your position is on Obamacare, we had scientific polling done during the debate. The American people were against it. Their Congress did not represent them. Instead, they passed it. And we could, Republicans could sit out there and say, well, that's all because of the Democrats. But what happened with George Bush's Medicare Part D
that's right.
And the prescription drug benefit? It was not something the American people demanded. Obviously people could use help with paying for their medicines or paying for their groceries or anything else. But we Americans sort of, at least at some point, it seemed, really valued the idea of making it on our own and building our own dreams.
Right.
And not depending on somebody else for it. We're in a very scary time, and our political system, as envisioned by the founders, is doing just fine. The answer is more democracy, and I don't mean as a system of government, but I mean the people being able to weigh in. But when I think about how little politicians listen to us, it reconfirms my belief in two key elements to solve our present political problems before they bankrupt us and destroy our kids and our grandkids' future. And that is term limits. It's time that we didn't allow anybody to serve more than 2 or 3 terms in the House or 2 terms in the Senate. And we had that across the board. It's not a panacea, but it means that nobody gets to monopolize the seat of power, and that's a good first step.
Right. If it's good enough for the president, it's good enough for a congressman. I agree. I would go for one, but go ahead. I'll acquiesce to the two.
Well, but the second thing that we need, because there's a lot of other reforms needed, and because, as you point out, so many people have been conflicted and bought off, and the government's offering all kinds of things, and, well, gee, I want mine, but I don't want to have to pay for yours, and it's a mess. The only way I think we're going to get a handle on it is for the people to be able to weigh in directly. It's a difficult process in your home state of Oklahoma, as we both know,
right?
To put an initiative on the ballot, but we need that at every level, and I think we need some way to do some of that at the national level, but certainly at every level, state and local government, the people ought to be able to weigh in directly. And I think Washington is so sick with no cure in sight. I think that the states and localities, I think smart political people who have limited, we all only live so long. We got to make the use of our time, so right. It's silly to be tilting at windmills. I think we have to be focused on the state and local level, and I think we need to take back our state and local governments, because I think we're going to need them if we're ever going to wrestle the monster in Washington down and stop him from bankrupting us.
Yeah, I guess it's a lot easier for a resident of a particular state to run for their state House of Representatives.
Right.
And
It certainly is. Because you can go meet the people directly. You don't have to depend on being able to raise millions of dollars. And in fact, Joe, when I talk about initiative referendum, the state people probably most often think about is California. And there have been a lot of politicians prattling on about how, well, it's the initiative problem. Initiative process has been the problem there and created the mess. And you investigate and you find out that's not at all the case, that they haven't spent money through the initiative. They spent money because that legislature is crazy. But why is that legislature so out of control? They even have term limits, too.
Right.
They're out of control because the average House member has a district with more than 500,000 people in it. And the average senator has more than 1 million constituents.
Oh, gosh.
So your ability to compete by walking your district, forget about it. You'll be about 100 years old by the time you reach everybody.
Right. Well, what's the answer to? I guess each state has to increase the number of congressmen and make the districts a lot smaller and manageable.
Well, I think that's right. I think that's one of the key reforms, and I think most people kind of instinctively think about it and they think, well, we don't want more politicians, we want less. But less politicians means that each individual is much lesser represented, right. and so I do think that's a key way for people to be better represented. But I think there's two things people have to recognize. And I think by and large the American people do, but we're encouraged to forget them. And one of them is that government is not magic. It's just because we pass a law that says no child is left behind doesn't mean every Johnny and Sally in America is suddenly a genius with a PhD.
Oh, I thought that's the way it worked, Paul.
No, but the funny thing is we all know it isn't the way it works, but why do these people on TV keep talking like it is?
Right. I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. But you make a good point, because if people ran who really cared about the freedom of the individual, libertarian values, which this country was based on, not Democrat, Republican values or anything like that, but pure libertarian values, which is classical liberalism, basically. If they did and they ran for office, they can at least invoke state sovereignty when the federal government embarks on these programs, and they can say, sorry, we're not participating, and they have every right to do that.
Well, and look at what's happening. My home state of Arkansas, they passed the Republicans take over for the first time since Reconstruction. That's the century before last century, so it's a long time ago. Yeah. But Republicans take over there, and they pass some Obamacare light expansion of Medicaid. I understand in Oklahoma they're doing the same thing, and so it's of course they're facilitating. How does Obamacare work from expanding Medicaid? Well, the federal government says, we're going to spend 90 cents out of every dollar. Don't worry, we got you. And what's going to happen, like every other federal program,
right
down the road, people are going to be used to getting this benefit, and all of a sudden the taxpayers of that state are going to have to pick it up.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. You know what bothers me?
It's a mess. It'll bankrupt the state.
Well, it's interesting when they talked about this last debacle with the budget. No one talked about eliminating foreign aid, which is in 2012 was $55.3 billion. The two top recipients were Afghanistan and Israel. That represents, for every man, woman, and child, $173.50 per year. Every man, woman, and child. Now, if you're just talking about parents, adults that are working, you're talking about $250. That is a tax of $250 that every one of us is bearing per year on foreign aid, which is illegal according to the Constitution. Are you with me on that?
Well, and I'm with you against the foreign aid. I didn't realize that there was something in the Constitution that would prevent it. But it is the kind of thing where oftentimes you hear, well, that's not that much money. Well, if it's a dumb thing to do, there are times when you go through your family budget and you have to cut things. But if you ever come to something that you and your spouse say, gee, this is really stupid, we don't even like this.
Right.
And, whatever service and product it is, it doesn't make any sense. It's counterproductive. You cut it real quick. So, of course, that's right. But you said a minute ago, Joe, and I think this is something for people to think about, because on any given issue, people can have different ideas. But
right.
A minute ago, you talked about having a libertarian sense of freedom. And you and I were libertarians. We have a real sense of what that word means. I think sometimes other people don't always. But you mentioned it's not Democrat or Republican. And it always, really hits me that I'm a Republican, not a big R Republican, a small R Republican, because I believe in Republican values, things like breaking up power and having checks and balances, and having constitutional limits on power. Those are all Republican ideas. And as libertarians, and frankly, as Americans of just about every stripe, we all believe in that.
Right.
We all
That's
want
correct.
the minority protected and all those things. In fact, the folks who seem to fall down on promoting those values oftentimes are Republicans, the large R ones.
Right.
And then we look at Democrats, and oftentimes when I'm fighting for initiative referendum, the folks in the legislatures, certainly out in California, and in other states where the legislature is controlled by Democrats, they fight us. They try to block initiative and referendum. They try to block the small d democratic checks on government, like initiative and referendum, and so they're not very good Democrats. And what that says, I think, to the person who's not as committed to a certain ideology or political philosophy, is if people, there are certain things that are universal, and I think those basic Republican ideas, those basic small R Republican, basic small d Democratic ideas, the idea that people should basically be free as long as they're not hurting anybody else, which is the basis of libertarianism.
Correct.
These are ideas that we all agree on.
Right.
And then we get in the political arena, and obviously we're not going to agree on everything all the time, but our politics isn't anywhere close to a discussion about these ideas.
Right.
Our politics is about splitting up the loot. and whose special interests are going to get what benefits, and who gets to rent seek off the American taxpayer, the biggest sucker. There are more blood-sucking, the mosquitoes sucking off the American taxpayer than anybody in history. And it's just, it's sad. They what was the joke about politics? Politics comes from two words, the poly meaning many and kicks meaning bloodsuckers.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I love that.
But that's what we're getting, and we're getting it out of both Republicans and Democrats, because they're power clubs. They're clubs for incumbents to wield power, and I think ideological disagreement, might mean that things are controversial at times, but that's not what's holding our country back. I don't think it's a matter of clashing ideologies. I think it's a matter of a public that's really scammed by politicians who are constantly trying to create flashpoints to hide the fact that they're stealing our wallets.
Yeah. Well, Paul, what really concerns me is me and the way I think, because I was watching the news, and I was watching RT News. I said, "Jesus, this is good news." I mean, it was well balanced. They had, they just didn't have, the typical mainstream media people come in, and everything sort of made sense. I said, "Geez, this is good news." And then I found out RT stood for Russian television. I watched Russian television news, and I said, and then not a few days ago, Putin put out a statement, or maybe gave a speech and it was typed out, on the internet, on the situation in Syria. I agreed with every word he said. Now, he may not have meant it. He may do the exact opposite. But what he had published, I agreed with. And I said, this is crazy. I mean, if here I am admitting it on radio, I'll probably lose my job. But here I am. I'm watching Russian news, and I'm agreeing with Vladimir Putin, and I'm disagreeing with our president. I've got to be one of the most un-American people on the face of this earth.
Well, it was. I actually ended a column a few weeks ago at Town Hall where I said, when our president can make Putin look good, something really bad.
Exactly. Yeah, it's actually.
And there's another case where I think, it used to be, and I'm not sure it was true. I was probably too young to know whether it was true or not. But in my adult life, you like to think, even though I have opposed our interventions abroad, that the people who voted for them believed in them.
Right.
But I think now we're in a situation where they play politics as well with people's lives, and if intervention is done by a Republican, the Democrats don't like it. If it's done by the Democrats, the Republicans don't like it. And of course, the truth is, we ought to not have. We now have a situation where this republic, where the individual is so important, where there is no king, has a president who can kill anybody he wants in the world with a drone strike, basically no questions asked, because they won't admit that they ever used the drone.
Right, absolutely.
Even though we all know they're killing people all the time. We have a president of the United States who years ago, George W., got away with arresting an American citizen and holding him for, what was that, a year and a half before the courts finally made him charge the person. We're living in a time that, it just seems so scary because we're doing things on a governmental level, like keeping everybody's, emails and what they post on Facebook and what they, what phone calls they make, all these things combined, and yet our government has no legitimacy in terms of public approval. The last thing in the world anybody would trust, you joke about used car salesmen. How many Americans would opt for a congressman over a used car salesman? I don't know any.
Yeah, excuse me, Paul.
And we all kind of recognize that it's not. We're not being fair to the used car salesmen.
But we have become absolutely numb. We do not think. China downgraded our debt. Downgraded it. Now China owns over $1 trillion of our debt. They slit their own wrist by doing that. They slit their own. Just think about that. I mean, by doing so, they harm themselves more than us. That's how strongly they must feel about it. They did not gain by this whatsoever. I mean, people should be saying, China downgraded our debt. We've got a problem. Instead of saying, well, I'm glad that the House and the Senate got together and they resolved the issue, they compromised, and now we can go on business as usual. Do you know, Dr. Kutlikoff, who's been on my show, the University of Boston? He does a lot of work with total debt and stuff like that. He's an economist, world-renowned guy, and a year ago, our unfunded debt was $223 trillion. Now, that did not include the current portion. Now, when someone asks you if you borrowed $50,000 and the first year you had to pay back $10,000, and someone says, well, geez, how much you owe the bank? Would you say $10,000? No, you say $50,000, to which $10,000 this year. And this is what we have to do by law. If we did the same thing with our government today, our debt, current and unfunded, would be $1/4 of $1 quadrillion and growing. Let me say that again. $1/4 of $1 quadrillion. You probably have never heard that term before. That's like traveling from the Earth to Pluto. That's how far it is. And yet, we're we're just kicking the can down the road.
Well, and in fact, we're having a big, several-week television, newspaper, media drama about whether the government's going to be open or closed, and doing stupid stuff like closing monuments, and then acting about like all the government workers are being put on and so on. Well, I live around, most people who live around me work for the government or a contractor. Now, the contractors probably got hurt a little bit, but the government employees knew it was going to be a paid vacation. Recently, my youngest daughter is a big fan of the Hunger Games, and I went and saw that movie. And what just struck me, I don't know, if you've read the book or seen the movie, but it's these different parts of the government, and it's after kind of a governmental collapse. And I haven't read them all; she has, but anyway, the one district, which is the capital, is by far the wealthiest district and controls the other districts.
Right.
And there they live lavishly and, kind of whistling past the graveyard every day. And that's, I think, exactly how Washington, D.C. is.
Exactly.
After I saw the movie, I did a common sense. You might recall, Joe, talking about it, because, in recent years, I believe now it's 6 of the 10 wealthiest counties in the nation surround Washington.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
And
yeah.
That's why I say that part of what has to happen is the folks who recognize that government isn't magic and can't just solve problems by passing some bill with thousands of pages of gobbledygook in it, mainly little handoffs to different special interests. They've got to stand up and say, hey, when I think of education, I think of the fact that, we've been educating our kids. Parents have been passing stuff on for thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
We know how to do this. We don't need some federal bureaucracy to reinvent it. This is, and here we are in the middle of an information revolution, but we can't teach Johnny how to read anymore.
Paul, you know what? We can go on forever, but believe it or not, we only have 30 seconds left, and we're going to get knocked off the air. So why don't you? I'll give you the 30 seconds on who you are and how people can reach you and what you do.
Well, I work with Citizens in Charge, citizensincharge.org. We work to protect your initiative and referendum rights because we have to do it ourselves. I work on a commentary Monday through Friday at thisiscommonsense.com, and I work for a group called Liberty Initiative Fund at libertyifund.org, putting pro-freedom measures on the ballot, state and local level across the country.
Okay, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll accept my invitation to return at a later date.
Always a pleasure, Joe. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com.